Is this a is this a power struggle, or is it just Trump who is unfocused without a strategy?
I think that's the biggest problem. President Trump is unfocused and is without a strategy. Now, I haven't seen much evidence that vice presidents mean very much in the context of our political system. In Britain, they talk about the king has an heir and then a spare. Well, we have a spare. The spare is called the vice president. I don't see much evidence that President Trump listens to anything J.D. Vance has to say. I don't know that he listens to anybody, but certainly not J.D. Vance very much. He's just assigned J.D. Vance a new task, the quote unquote tariff czar. What a terrible position to be in. I mean, this is back with Kamala Harris on the border. They gave her this thing, and of course, she did absolutely nothing. And that was, I guess, the real purpose of it. But she was irrelevant. And I think at this point, J.D. Vance is going to be this tariff czar. What's he going to do? The horse has left the barn. Is he going to ride out there, capture the horse, bring it back, and lock it up? No, I don't think so. This business of disputes inside the administration, he's always had, whenever he was president previously, people in his administration that he appointed and didn't agree with. This is monumentally stupid if you're actually trying to accomplish something. But we're back to the question of what are we trying to accomplish? And I think that President Trump and his inner circle have been very focused on getting a win for the boss. We got to go out there and get a win for the president. How do we make this a win? And that dragged us into the nonsense in Ukraine. There's no win there for us. We should never been in the place. So the smart thing for him at the very beginning was to say, "Look, I didn't support this. I didn't want this. So I'm ending all future aid to Ukraine, and I'm pulling all the American troops and intelligence operatives and advisors and everybody else out of Ukraine in the next 48, 72 hours. Forget it. Leave." The Europeans then would have moaned and groaned, but there's not a great deal they can do about it. We know what the Europeans amount to militarily in the absence of the United States. Not much. And this goes all the way back to the Second World War. I mean, we had no strategy per se in the Second World War. We never had an interest in the destruction of Japan. We never had an interest in the destruction of Germany. So what were we doing? What was this unconditional surrender about? Why were we bombing everyone into the Stone Age? We did it because we could do it. No thought was given to what happens when the Japanese field armies are removed from Manchuria and Korea. Who fills the vacuum? What happens if you force the German military establishment to its knees and destroys it? Well, you open the floodgates to communism and Stalin. No thought, no imagination, a complete failure of imagination, and ideologically driven hatred that is always part of the American way of war. You have to go back to Wilson, suddenly decides to turn old Kaiser Wilhelm into some sort of evil satanic figure. It's absurd. It doesn't make any sense at all. And what was our interest in World War I? Did we really just want to rescue the banks in England and Paris? Are we just rescuing, imperialists? What did we go there for? What was our interest in that? I mean, none of these questions have ever been asked intelligently. So we're very poor in terms of developing strategy. There is no end state in mind. The end state is Germany's destroyed, Japan is destroyed, we win. That cost us, what, 50 years and trillions of dollars and compelled us to stay overseas in places we didn't want to be. So here we are 80 years later after World War II, and what are people talking about? Withdrawing forces. It's going to happen because we have this other problem, and that is the mismanagement of the economy and the financial crisis is developing. Remember that one of the promises made in the context of the tariffs privately was, we're the big market. Everybody needs us. No one can live without us. And once we do these things, foreign capital will pour in to our treasury markets because that's how we finance ourselves. Foreign capital pours in, buys up the treasuries, and that's how we finance our government because we can otherwise not cover the shortfall in spending. The problem is we no longer have the manufacturing base we once did. We don't have the opportunity to employ tens of millions of people today as we once did. And that's the problem with the illegal aliens. You've got 51 million people who are illegally inside the United States. Well, how do they live? Who's paying for their health care, their education? Who is putting up with the widespread law breaking and criminality? Well, we are. But at a point in time where we can't afford it, it's just beyond our means. So there is no strategy, period. And I think everything is impulse driven. Trump wakes up and says, oh, I want to get those Chinese. Okay, everybody on board. And off we go. And then somebody comes back a few days later and says, this is probably not a great idea. So how do we get out of this? Well, we can't just say we were wrong and made a mistake. That's impossible. So I think your question is a valid one. I don't have a good answer because I see no strategy. I saw no strategy under Biden. I haven't seen any strategy anywhere, certainly since the end of the Cold War, and even that was of questionable utility. I mean, it was this business of containment, but containment then became an opportunity to intervene in a place like Southeast Asia and Vietnam, which made no sense. It had nothing to do with the Soviets.
That's an interesting comparison because in World War One, the demonization of Germany, it became almost a substitute for a strategy. And indeed, Henry Kissinger, he made a similar remark back in, well, I can't remember when it was. He wrote that the demonization of Vladimir Putin wasn't a strategy. It became the excuse for not having one, effectively. So it does appear that the hatred of opponents is doesn't take us anywhere.
But then look at the people who profit from these things. Are they behind it? Do they have a hand in this? I mean, I think they probably do. I think the bankers, the financiers, they absolutely have a hand in this. And business is good for the hill. I mean, their view is it's the old expression, war is the health of the state. And that's the way they look at it. Whenever we go to war, we make money. The fact that we may lose trillions in the process and tens of thousands and kill hundreds of thousands, none of that makes any difference. The bottom line is we profit everything. The stock market roars ahead. Check all the investments in the big five defense industries. Everything's just great.
Well, what would be your strategy then? Because you're a former retired colonel in the U.S. Army. Um you've spoken to Trump in the past. You're the CEO of our country, our choice. Have you made up some thoughts with the direction you think the United States should go, especially in terms of its relationship with Ukraine and Europe? Should it just decouple, or how do you see, well, I guess a better approach, a better American policy to, I guess, adjust to this new multipolar world?
Well, I think the first point of any American strategy, and I think this will eventually happen because we are simply going to be financially ruined and have no choice. But number one is a hemispheric defense. In other words, we should defend the Western Hemisphere, our interests in the Western Hemisphere, as well as our continental empire. People talk about the empire. We are an empire. The empire was built from the Atlantic to the Pacific, and that should have been enough. We all know now that for various reasons we were seduced into joining the British in the scramble for empire, and that got us into the Spanish-American War and Puerto Rico, the Cuba, the Philippines, and all these things. But I think number one is hemispheric defense. Number two is we have an interest in doing business with everyone. There was this business of treating countries as permanent enemies, particularly countries that don't necessarily agree with us on all of our policy positions, is catastrophic. We did not have that opinion back before the First World War. We tended to view, places from the standpoint of what's in it for us. Why should we be involved in China? Is there some particular vital strategic interest that justifies our presence there? Those questions have not been asked for many, many years. I would argue that today we have a vital strategic interest in dramatically reducing our overseas profile. And how we do that is very important. In other words, you pull the plug and just bring everybody home. That may not be the best way to do it. You may want to do it over a period of 3 or 4 years incrementally. But in order to do that, you have to have control of your government. You have to have a stable, long-term end state that everybody understands and is striving to achieve. We don't have that. So, when Trump was the president the first time around, privately, he thought in those terms. He said, yeah, why after 70 years are we still in Korea? Why after 70 years are we still in Europe? What are we doing in Germany? What are we doing, in Japan and on and on? I mean, he asked those questions. And of course, the neocon answer from the people that profit from all of this disastrous policy, they said, oh, we have to be there. If we're not there, the world will fall apart. Everyone will fight with each other. We're the keystone in the edifice of Pax Americana. Well, that's just nonsense. That's not necessarily going to happen. And right now, that's why we look particularly impotent. There's no one in Asia interested in a war except us. You sit down with the Japanese, the Koreans, the Vietnamese, and they'll discuss their neighbors and thinking, but no one sees imminent war with China. And in most cases, they're not afraid of the Chinese militarily at all. Now, they are concerned about China's massive market, its massive economy, its massive manufacturing base. But the Asian solution does not involve bombing China to get rid of it. It's looking for ways to cooperate and limit, within certain restrictions, how each side works with the other. We don't think in those terms. You're either with us or against us. And that was the problem in 9/11. If you go back and listen to George Bush, that was his message. Either you're with us or against us. In truth, most places, most of the time, are neutral. And we should welcome that. But that gets you back to the real question is, what is the business of America? And the business of America has historically been commerce. George Washington, when he left the presidency, said, give this nation 20 years of peace, and we will grow so strong economically that no one in the world will ever dare challenge us. Well, he was right. And while we took that position, we were very successful. People liked us. We were popular. It's all of these interventions in places that are really of no concern for us. We have no historic or vital strategic interest of any kind in Ukraine, least of all in Eastern Ukraine. You could have made the argument if you were sitting in NATO. In fact, I suggested that this be privately communicated to the Russians. Of course, nobody did it. Most Americans don't understand this. Even the people in the State Department and DOD, what are you talking about? I said, what happens east of the Dnieper River? That's not part of the West. Never has been. Kiev, for most of its existence, certainly after the Mongols destroyed it in 1240, was an outpost for the West on the Dnieper River. And the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth controlled that for centuries. That's why Western Ukraine is radically different from Russia. That's why the language is different. That's why many of the words that are used are not the same. That's why the population genetically is different. So the point is, no one thought in those terms. That's the way people thought who were prudent like Bismarck. When the Russian foreign minister said, we want control of the Bosporus in 1879, and asked Bismarck, what will Germany's position be on this? He said, well, we have no interest in the Bosporus. It doesn't make any difference to us who ultimately controls it as long as commerce can pass through it. But Bismarck was very clever, and he understood that the British would be horrified because the last thing they wanted was a Russian fleet coming out of the Black Sea into the Mediterranean that might put British control of the Suez Canal at risk. Ultimately, that's why there was no war between Russia and the Ottoman Empire, because the British weighed in. And again, the Russians went back to the Germans and said, well, if we go to war down there, will you support us? And again, the answer came back, we're not going to fight a war in the Balkans. I mean, Germans have no interest down there. We got to get back to thinking more rationally and prudently and cast aside the emotion. But today, everything is emotion. And again, everything's impulse driven.